All right, the last shape in our area lab is the trapezoid. This is probably the most complex shape that we are going to look at. It does have one set of parallel sides and it has two different bases. We're going to see that here. So we're going to start with the same rectangle that we used before. So go ahead and pause your video and you're going to cut out a rectangle that is 8 by 6, just like we've been using. The next thing we're going to do is create the trapezoid from this rectangle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler or your ID, straight edge, whatever you have, and I'm just going to go in maybe to the second line here. And I'm going to put my ruler there on that little corner, and I'm going to draw a line from there to the bottom corner. Okay, so it looks like that. And then I'm going to do that on the other side. I'm going to go 2 in, and you don't have to go the same number of spaces in. You could go further. I'm just going to do the same and keep it even here. So it looks like this. Now I'm going to cut along those lines. Alright, and you can just scoot those pieces off. We now have a trapezoid. So this is a trapezoid. So what we're going to do now is we're going to trace this trapezoid. So here we have our trapezoid, and I know it's paper, it's a little bit difficult to trace. You just kind of have to hold it down the best you can here and just trace all around your 4 edges here. Use 2 fingers here to hold it down. All right. So we can see that up here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 units across. Down here, if I count down here, I have 8 units across. So one big difference that we see in a trapezoid is that there are 2 different bases. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how do we find the area of this trapezoid. So go ahead and pause your video and answer number 1 for me. Estimate the number of unit squares from the trapezoid above. So go ahead and count the number of unit squares you see there. Alright, so when you counted your squares, you probably counted anywhere from 34 to 38 squares. And then we've already talked about how there are 2 different bases, the 4 units and the 8 units. And then we have a height here, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units tall. But now we're going to create a parallelogram because we don't know how to find the area of this trapezoid exactly. We don't have a formula yet. So we're going to use the shape that we know, and we know how to find the area of a parallelogram. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our trapezoid and we're going to cut it in half. So if it's 6 units tall, I'm going to cut it in half so that there's 3 units on the top and 3 units on the bottom. Okay, so there's the bottom of my trapezoid. And then I cut the top off, so that's what fits right here. But what I want to do is create a parallelogram. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the top of that trapezoid, and I'm going to rotate it down here. So let me do that one more time. Here's the top of my trapezoid. So I just cut it in half. I'm going to rotate it and move it right down here. Now you can glue that parallelogram down. Alright, so I've got a little bit of glue here. I'm going to glue my parallelogram that I've created. I'm going to glue that down. Okay, so here's my height. I still have that here. Okay, that's still my height. 6 units. All right. So now we're going to look at how is the size or the area of this trapezoid related to the area of the parallelogram. So we still have the same amount of squares from the trapezoid. So we started with this trapezoid, we cut it in half and rotated it over. So it's the same amount of squares, we just moved it into a different shape. We made it a parallelogram instead of a trapezoid. But we do have different dimensions now, because now we cut our height in half. Instead of 6, it's now 3. So now we have half the height. So we know that somewhere along the way we cut that height in half. Okay. We also have these 8 down here, and then we moved this 4 over here. So we've got 8 plus 4. So there's 12 here by 3. So we did change the dimensions a little bit. So when we turn this into a mathematical equation, we need to look at, well, we're adding the 2 bases, because here's where that 4 came from, the top. So we're adding the 2 bases. And we need to do that first. And then we can multiply that by the height, okay, because that's 12 by 3. But we're going to cut it in half, or take half the height. And then multiply by half the height. Or you can just think about cutting that whole thing in half. So what does this look like in a formula? Well, my area of a trapezoid is going to be half of the base times height, but we have 2 bases, so we're going to add base 1 and base 2 together. Okay. You could also think of it, or the area being the 2 bases added together, multiply that by the height, and then cut the whole thing in half. So half of the base plus base multiplied by the height, or you can think of it as the 2 bases added together, multiply it by the height, and then cut the whole thing in half.